You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Hey now, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Studio Chojin Raw, and once again, I'm speaking to Reverend Jim. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing well. Today, we are going to talk about Gamera Rebirth.
The Netflix animated series of Gamera that was a surprise when I first heard it announced, and was a surprise when I watched it.
Now, Gamera Rebirth came out in 2023, and it was directed by Hiroyuki Seshita, and it had a couple of writers. It was written by Hiroshi Seko, Hiroyuki Seshita, Kenta Ihara, and Tetsuya Yamada. And Gamera Rebirth is similar in vein to a lot of the recent tokusatsu renaissance we're having with Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider, where it is a celebration of the Showa era of Gamera. Every version of Godzilla has a different version of Ghidorah, has a different version of Mothra, and what I like about this Gamera series is that it's bringing monsters back from the 60s that we have not seen in like 50 years.
It's the best thing about the show, really. It was the redesigns they gave all of Gamera's Rogues Gallery are all really solid redesigns. There's some little nitpicks I have here and there, but for the most part, it's all really solid, and not just as an homage to like tokusatsu, but also whoever decided to give it the Stranger Things treatment needs to be applauded for it, because it was a brilliant way to go and remind us that Gamera is a friend of all children.
The human character designs were done by Atsushi Tomuda, who was also the character designer on Weathering With You, which I thought was very cool. And the monster designs were done by Kan Takahama, who is the author of the Nyx No Lantern anime. I'm not too familiar with her artwork, but I do like her designs. I think the monster designs is the strongest element of the show.
Absolutely. It's the one thing that stands out as the most memorable to me, because this was the big sticking point for me. I found the monsters and their designs stand out wonderfully. The human characters, their design looks like a PlayStation 2 video. It's one of the things that made it a bit of a hurdle for me to try and like really connect, but then there's so little emoting in the faces. They don't really animate the hair all that much, and it just kind of took me out of it for a lot of it. The writing is solid. The monster action's great. Some of my favorite Gamera fights ever are in this, but the character design just looks like they ran out of budget at some point, and it's such a bummer to me because everything else works so well. This one important visual element just kind of fell apart to me.
I like the character designs. I think they all work for what they're supposed to accomplish. Boko looks like the Boy Scout. Junichi looks like the smart person. Joe looks like the tough guy. I think what you're zeroing in on is the animation, which can be very choppy. There's that one scene in the first episode where they're going into that little secret hideout they're in, and it's very choppy. It looks like a 90s PC game. It didn't bother me as much with the expressions on their face, because for a long time when I was in art school, I could remember people telling me that they hated anime because the animation was very limited and the characters' faces weren't expressive enough. Even though the CGI in this show was not completely fluid, it didn't bother me because it did kind of remind me of the limited animation of the 70s.
I remember those days in art school too. It was always a struggle.
We had the same teachers!
Oh, we had the same teachers. We had, some of the students there. I remember after I had graduated, I was still taking an evening class, and I knew things were changing because one of the students was wearing a Naruto headband, and I'm just thinking like, yeah, things are changing. It's slow, but they're changing.
Oh my god, he owes me a thank you for paving the way for him.
It was a girl, I believe, that was wearing it.
Oh, well, she owes me a thank you then.
This, to me, I think wouldn't go and change a lot of minds as far as like anime looking limited. Again, they'd love the monster stuff, but the way it moves is very choppy and very stiff. I think about the Netflix show The Dragon Prince, and how that first season, there's still a little bit of that frame rate jank, but for the most part, it didn't really bother me too much, but I saw some people that would complain. It's like, it doesn't look right. But they fixed that by the second season. But this was like that same problem, but worse, because the character models just seemed kind of too plain. I think as far as designs, they were simple but effective, but they needed a little more visual oomph. At the same time, they're also trying to go and keep this a bit more grounded compared to other Gamera movies where Gamera was the friend of all children. Those could get bonkers really quickly.
The design design of Boko with his sweater vest and his socks pulled up to his knees, he felt like a Gamera protagonist from the 60s. He looked to me like a character that could have been in those 60s Gamera movies.
Yeah, I could dig it. He was probably one of the best things about the show as far as like the writing. He was this kind of merging of HEISEI and SHOWA Gamera sensibilities. HEISEI in that he suddenly starts developing this psychic bond with Gamera. SHOWA in that this is a young kid, and as a kid he's got unshakable faith that Gamera will live and survive and save the day.
When I first watched it, I was very confused after Gamera lands in Tokyo and he calls him Gamera, and I was like, well, he just pulled that name out of his head. But then as you watch it, you could see that he has a psychic link with Gamera, where he could sense after Gamera fights Zigra that Gamera is better. That's a great way of putting it, where he's this combination of Asagi from the Heisei trilogy and a little bit of the little random kids that would just get kidnapped by aliens in the Showa Gamera.
It was always aliens too, with the exception of Jiger, but it was almost always aliens. Even Gauss, I remember, in the Showa series, tries to kidnap a kid. More to go and eat the kid, but he still tries.
Gamera is the protector of all children. Even though Gamera in his first outing, in the first Gamera movie, he does save a kid, but he only saves the kid after he destroyed the lighthouse. The kid was standing on the lighthouse Gamera was destroying, and Gamera saved him. So he basically just saved him from the damage he was causing, which at that point, I don't really know that you're a hero, you're just basically decent.
I always wonder what possessed Gamera to do that, looking at him from the perspective of this is a giant animal. I'm assuming it's more curiosity that would have driven the giant turtle to go and just suddenly catch the little kid that's hanging from there and then putting him down and flying off. And we'll always remember, thanks to Mystery Science Theater, how the kid, after being saved by Gamera, becomes a hopeless devotee of Gamera's. He is constantly telling all the grown-ups Gamera's really a nice person, even though he's wandering through Tokyo and smashing it to bits. The Showa Gameras could get frickin' wacky sometimes, and that's... I know it's supposed to be played for tragedy, but at the same time, I can't help but laugh. It's easy to go and laugh at it. Maybe it's the ridiculousness of it. Maybe it's just looking at a kid that's deluded himself. Maybe I just have no heart at this point and laugh at any kind of mental illness. I really don't know at this point in my life. I've grown too old to know the difference.
Gamera, as we know him now, he is the guardian of the universe. He restores balance in the world. The MonsterVerse Godzilla is very similar to the Heisei Gamera. And Gamera in the Showa era is not that dissimilar from Heisei Gamera, in the sense that Showa Gamera is almost like Superman, where like a kaiju will appear and then Gamera will just randomly appear to fight the kaiju.
This looks like a job for Gamera. Pretty much.
Godzilla was created by the atomic bomb, and Gamera is a product of the Cold War. In the original Gamera, there's an American jet fighting an unknown jet and launches a missile and hits the jet, and the jet crashes into the ice, and that releases Gamera from his slumber. Gamera, in his first appearance, even though he does save a kid, he does not start off as the protector of children. Because even though he saved a kid, he's still mindlessly destroying cities. And even in the sequel, in Gamera vs. Bakugan, he is still not the protector of children. He's another problem that exists with this other monster, Bakugan.
He's honestly a dick in Gamera vs. Bakugan. The first few minutes of Gamera vs. Bakugan, the first Gamera movie ends with Gamera being put into a rocket and sent into outer space. In Gamera 2, they revealed the ship was hit by an asteroid. Gamera immediately went back to Earth, goes to a dam, destroys the facility, takes in the flames that he's set, the whole building is now set on fire, then purposely flies up and just starts ramming into the dam until it breaks and floods everything in its way. Gamera is just a dick in the beginning.
Yeah, in Gamera vs. Bakugan, he's just another problem. Gamera is a problem, fucking shit up, and Bakugan is a problem, fucking shit up, and then eventually these two problems just deal with each other.
Gamera vs. Bakugan is always one of those ones that's like such an outlier too, because it's the only Showa Gamera movie that doesn't have any children in it. It's more of a traditional kaiju movie in that regard. You have Bakugan almost as a representation for the villain of the movie, Onodera, almost as like this representation of his greed, and that greed consumes him when Bakugan sees him and eats him right there. I don't know how Bakugan didn't go and keel over dead after eating him, because he's just the most evil character you'll ever see in a frickin' monster movie. It's actually, to me, it's one of the better Gamera movies as well, because it's got that more mature edge to it. But the thing is that it's also, Gamera's almost an afterthought in his own movie. It focuses more on how do we get rid of Bakugan. And then, like you said, it turns into, well, let's just let these two problems deal with each other.
The first three Gamera movies, Gamera the Giant Monster, Gamera vs. Bakugan, and Gamera vs. Gauss, it suffers from that 1960s sci-fi movie problem where it's just a bunch of guys sitting in a room looking at printouts saying, how do we kill this monster? It isn't until Gamera vs. Vitus, Gamera becomes the friend of all children, and they're singing the Gamera song. The Gamera song was sung by the Boy Scouts of Japan, and the Boy Scouts of Japan were in the movie.
If there's anything that I'll end up taking to my grave from kaiju movies, it's probably going to be the Gamera song. I'll bring up a comparison to the final SHOWA Gamera movie, actually. Gamera Rebirth reminded me of Gamera Super Monster, which sounds really bad, but bear with me. It's got that same structure. These kids come across a problem. The problem becomes something that's going to go and potentially destroy the world. Gamera comes in and saves the day. Gamera Super Monster is structured very similarly, only it's done with a lot of stock footage and really bad special effects, even for a Gamera movie. You do get a kick-ass song from Shunsuke Kikuchi, the theme for Gamera Super Monster. That is an awesome theme, right in there with something out of Dragon Ball, since he also did the music for Dragon Ball.
What I do like about Gamera Rebirth is that it is taking influence from Stranger Things. It's taking influence from Stephen King's It. That second episode where they go to kill Jiger in the sewer reminds me a lot of when in It when they went to go kill Pennywise. And I do think the relationship between the kids in this movie, this is the best version of that in terms of feeling like a real relationship. I like Asagi in the Gamera trilogy from the Heisei era, but the problem with that was Asagi had nobody to interact with. Even though the animation in here may be stiff, I think the characters, they do feel like real friends.
I'll agree with that. I would counter what you say that in Gamera the Brave, I think the relationship with the kids feels pretty genuine there. I guess you could also say it also feels like if Studio Ghibli made a kaiju movie, so some of the relationships may be a little, not off, but there's a different quality to it than you would get from your typical Stranger Things situation.
There's a split amongst the Gamera team. The old Daiei executives, they love the Showa era, and they hate all Heisei Gamera. And everybody who worked on the Heisei Gamera hates all the Showa Gamera. When the team from the Showa Gamera got in charge of Gamera again, that's when they gave us Gamera the Brave and gave us more of that family-friendly Gamera. And this show totally feels much more consistent with Gamera the Brave, even though the Gamera in this show feels more in line with Gamera Guardian of the Universe or Gamera Attack of Edegion.
I would say he's closest to how he is in Gamera 3, just that snapping turtle design, even just like the shape of his eyes, that more kind of hunched over stance, the giant, not quite flipper arms, but just the enormous arms in there. It takes a lot more monster-wise from the Heisei series than it does from anything Showa related. Even some of the ways that the monsters interact with the humans takes a very Heisei approach to it. There are moments I remember in Gamera 2 Attack a Legion when the subway starts coming through all this debris that the swarm of Legion have brought down, and they attack the guy because they were collecting glass and things like that, and the poor guy had glasses on. You just see that hand come up against the door and that enormous splash of blood. And this, it never gets that bloody, but it certainly can reach that level of intensity.
I think Gamera bled before Godzilla.
Yeah.
The one thing I remember when I got into Gamera movies as a kid was how bloody they were, and Godzilla movies were never that bloody.
The monster-on-monster violence in the Heisei series is also, I don't think it's as bloody, but it certainly is more intense. Gamera gets put through the ringer in the Heisei series, and the way Gamera gets put through the ringer in this series might surpass it. The way he gets abused throughout Gamera 2 Attack of Legion, he gets a chunk taken out of his shell from the Mother Legion. You see the pincers go, looks like it's trying to pry the shell off of him, to the point where you can even hear the monster full-on screaming, and you see these little wounds afterwards. Then you have in Gamera 3, he gets run through by one of Iris's arm swords. I don't know what you would call it, but I'll go with arm swords. He gets run through completely, and then later on in the climax has to blow his own arm off, which we'll get to that and how they reference that in Gamera Rebirth later. As it is, though, the monster action in this is still very, again, it's not bloody, but it has its moments. And it starts with Gamera fighting the big Gauss in the first episode. And I'm just looking looking here. I almost forgot that they gave Gauss an extra ability with its weird tongue. Did that look right to you? Because it always kind of seemed like a weird choice, but kind of fit.
You mean at the end where that giant Gauss has that giant tongue and he's like hypnotizing Gamera?
The weirdest French kiss scene ever in a kaiju movie.
To me, that made sense because this was like a different Gauss. This was like an Ultra Gauss.
Yeah, S-Gauss. That was the official name for it. Now that I think about it too, in that final episode, it gets extremely Showa. Since they say that the series takes place in 89, and it holds kind of true to that. There's something to be said about it that I can go and get to later. But in the final episode, they're able to go and take these X-ray images of Gamera somehow, and that's straight out of Gamera versus Jiger. They actually explained it in Gamera versus Jiger that they just had an X-ray that they had to go and like take multiple shots all over him until they had to go and put it together like some sort of weird puzzle. And then they're able to go and actually see what was wrong with Gamera. They do something similar to that, but it's not quite as expanded upon there. I guess it's more of a trope in Japanese media, really, where they'll actually go and explain, okay, we're doing this, we're gonna do that, and it shows you exactly how they actually accomplished something that seems unbelievable. And I always appreciate going that extra mile to go and bring that about. In the final episode, it's acceptable enough, but it just lacks a little bit of, I guess, narrative polish. I don't know what you would call it compared to how it is even in the Showa series.
The final episode is calling back to the original Gamera. In the last part of the last episode, Gamera becomes evil, and then he's standing in front of a lighthouse. And for the entire time, I was waiting for him to destroy that lighthouse, and he never did, and I was so disappointed.
How did I not pick up on that? Christ, how did I not pick up on that?
In that last episode, Gamera, he is attacked by the Gauss. It's the final act of this corporation to take control of Gamera. Eventually, what ends up happening is Gamera ends up self-destructing, so he doesn't kill everybody, which kind of calls to the beginning of Gamera the Brave. What they should have did, they should have had Gamera destroy the lighthouse and almost kill Boko. And then, when Gamera realizes what he's doing, that is when he self-destructs.
I like that a lot better. A lot of the execution for it was probably limited by some of the CGI, but boy, that would have been a lot better, wouldn't it? See, it all keeps going back to me. Some of the visuals for it didn't grab me like they should. There were moments where some of Gauss's injuries to Gamera look exactly the same like the injuries that Jiger gives Gamera with its needle tail. It just kind of looks like somebody just kind of put a copy-paste image on top of Gamera so it looks like a wound. He gets other wounds in there that look better, but I don't know why Gauss and Jiger, they decided to do something that shows how low budget it was.
Gamera movies were always more low budget than Godzilla movies. Gamera to me was always kind of like the SNK to Godzilla's Capcom. A lot of that I just accept for what it is.
Gamera does have a burn knuckle, so that was actually one of my favorite moments in there, because a lot of the monster fights in there are really pretty vicious. They don't quite fight like animals like in some Godzilla movies, but the fights themselves, they're the standout of it. Especially the final move that Gamera does in any of those fights. I think my favorite being when Gamera is fighting Jiger and uses his banishing fist from Gamera 3, just shoves his fist into Jiger's mouth and burns Jiger from the inside out. I thought that was so badass.
That was really cool. That was like a fatality. I think in the first episode, he just killed Gauss with just a fireball.
Yeah, it's a pretty basic finish.
Which is basically how he killed Gauss in Guardian of the Universe.
Which follows an opinion I've tended to generate. If there is a fight scene in a kaiju movie that takes place in an oil refinery, you have a good kaiju movie.